The book of Exodus is full of such rich content as it tells a story of God's people in captivity and at the hands of the Egyptians, and how God, with a mighty hand, led his people out of their slavery and then on their way toward the promised land. Of course, this deliverance, it didn't happen overnight, though. Pharaoh's heart was hardened against the Lord and against letting his people go. And so the Lord sent 10 mighty plagues upon Pharaoh and upon the nation of Egypt to show everyone who was really in control. Well, finally, after the last of the plagues, a humbled Pharaoh just wanted Moses and Aaron and the Israelites. He just wanted them to leave his sight. And so they did. But shortly after, he would change his mind again and set out to pursue the Israelites who just left. As you likely remember from Exodus, God showed his mighty power once more then, making a way for his people who were hemmed in on the banks of the Red Sea. God made a way for his people to walk across the sea on dry land, in between two mighty walls of water, while their pursuers weren't so blessed. They were washed away as the waves slammed back down on them. Well, after all of this, you would think that God's people would be all about doing what the Lord asked them to do. After all, he had delivered them from captivity. He was leading them as they journeyed on towards the promised land that lay ahead. So certainly, God's people would obey him now, right? They would follow his word. And it seems like the people of God felt that way too. Here's why I say that. In Exodus chapter 19, verse 7 and 8, it says this: "So Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered together and said, 'All that the Lord has spoken, we will do.'" Then 5 chapters later in Exodus 24, we read this: "Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules." And how did the people respond this time? The Bible tells us, "And all the people answered with one voice and said, 'All the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do.'" Again, God's people are confident. They're confident in their ability to keep God's rules. If only they were as good at doing it as they were confident they could. And I say that because just 8 chapters later, Moses goes up on Mount Sinai to receive God's instructions for his people. And when he returns, Moses doesn't find God's people doing God's word or keeping his law. Instead, Moses finds God's people worshiping a golden calf that they made for themselves. Many of God's people were put to death that day for their idolatry and their great sin. And yet God still showed mercy to his people. Because even after such great sin, such great failure to keep his commands, God didn't wipe them all out. Instead, he gave them his law again. In Exodus 34, we read this: "But Moses called to them and Aaron, and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses talked with them. Afterward, all the people of Israel came near, and he commanded them all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai." So what's the response this time? What do the people hear? Do we hear boasts about how they will keep God's law? Do we hear pride about how they will do it all? No, we don't. In fact, we hear nothing from the people. We hear crickets. Is it too far to say that the grace of God had left his people speechless and humbled? May we have the same humility as we reflect and realize this season of Lent how we have failed to follow God's word and ways ourselves. May we be left speechless as we are pointed again to the cross, and as we realize anew that though we have failed in keeping God's word or following his ways in so many aspects of our lives, yet God has been merciful to you and to me in Jesus Christ. We thank him that he has. I hope to see you tomorrow.